Now here's a name we've not spent too much time talking about yet in the early years of his racing career, but based on what's been happening recently in the 2018 season, perhaps that's about to change. And that's Mick Schumacher, son of course, the great Michael Schumacher. And he's just come off the back of performing what's quite a rare feat in Formula 3, which is winning all 3 races in a weekend in the European Championship. So we've got Autosport's F1 reporter Scott Mitchell with me to discuss Mick's career and perhaps what's going on in the future. But we've also got the perfect man to talk about this, our expert for all things junior single-seaters and in particular Formula 3, which is Marcus Simmons. And Marcus, you've probably followed the early stages of Mick's career more closely than anyone else in the Autosport office. What have you made of it up to this point, and what's been the sort of turning point for him this year? Because it all seems to be starting to come together.
Yeah, if you go right back to the beginning of his car racing career, he's already kind of done this before in the sense that he had 2 years in Formula 4. The first year was a little bit inconclusive. Okay, he had a reverse grid win at his first ever race weekend, but then second year in the hunt for both the German and Italian titles, winning races, he got beaten narrowly to both of them. So we've already seen that in a way, but obviously stepping up to Formula 3, it's a whole different level. The big problem last year was his qualifying, and he knew that, the team knew it, and we would usually see him qualify around 12th or 13th or something like that, and you're just not going to get into a top position from there in a Formula 3 race unless it's a massive crash fest at the Nurburgring or something like that. So, but what was noticeable was that he would normally be 10th or 11th by the end of lap 1 with all of his wings intact as well. So yeah, there was that little thing where you think, okay, this guy's a good racer. He's got good judgment of who's around him. He's making up places early on in the races. But then after that, as I say, it's very difficult to make progress in Formula 3. So they worked a lot on that over the winter with the Prema team, because they knew that was his weakness. So they really focused on the qualifying performances. And over the first half of the season, I wasn't really convinced that had been cracked, because he still wasn't really getting it together in qualifying. Although, because he was that much more experienced, he was a bit further up. Yeah, it's all very well going testing and having all day to put something together, but doing it in the intense 20-minute qualifying sessions, because that's all they get in Formula 3, and you've got another 22 or 23 cars out on the circuit with you, so people are getting in the way as well, so you've got to find a space on the track. The breakthrough pole came at Spa, which was kind of inconclusive, because Spa is more about whether you get a tow or not, and he did. For Formula 3 being so equal, what is so important is the psychology of the driver, and that just seems to have unlocked something within him, and he's carried that on to Silverstone and Misano and now the Nurburgring, where his qualifying bugbears seem to be well and truly behind him now.
So we've had the triple victory. I know that a handful of drivers have achieved that in the past, 2 of which I remember Lance Stroll and I believe Max Verstappen have done that in the past. Yeah. Has that kind of given him an almost false championship position, or is the fact that he's now so close to Dan Ticktum, who has been discussed as arguably would be in F1 next year if it wasn't for the super licence rules preventing it, is Mick kind of getting up to that level?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's only 3 points behind now. And there's 2 race weekends to go, so that's 6 races, 150 points available, so really anything can happen. And actually there's a load of other drivers who are still kind of in contention for the championship as well, so it's not just between those 2. But what's been impressive is that he's got that consistency of form at the moment, and he always seems to be up there. So yeah, he really is the late season, coming up on the rails challenger there, and if he carries on the way he's going, he could well win the championship.
Scott, you're in the F1 paddock for Autosport every race. Has Mick Schumacher been a name that's been talked about that much? For all the guys who are on the verge of F1, maybe a little higher up the ladder, particularly there's a strong F2 crop of drivers at the moment. We know who all those names are. Does Mick get talked about very much? He's made a few notable paddock appearances. He drove his dad's 94 Benetton, I think, in the Belgian Grand Prix last year. And I know he was at Monza recently, so I think he handed out the pole position award to Kimi Räikkönen. But is he really on the F1 radar yet, do you think?
No, not at the moment. Certainly not in the same way as even someone like Ticktum. You mentioned he's Red Bull's next big thing, or should be, especially if he tones down some of the sort of more erratic elements to his personality and driving. But Schumacher's never really been talked about in that regard, and certainly nowhere near the likes of the Formula 2 racers like Lando Norris and George Russell. So I think it's just because of his name, because of the fact that he's been a front runner in European Formula 3 this year. He's sort of on the radar, but not massive. He's definitely not hugely in focus. I think that would change, especially when you get a hat-trick of wins. And just sort of picking up on what was said about the Prema factor, we saw this with when Lance Stroll won the European Formula 3 title. So a lot of people try to play down the significance of a driver's achievement because it's Prema, because they're legendary in that championship and they're so good. But you have to do the job, because Stroll went there and did it and did very well, and he had good teammates that year. And then I think I'm right in saying that last year, I think the best placed Prema driver was third. Was it Gunter?
That's
third
right,
in the championship. And I think a fairly distant third as well, maybe faded in the second half of the year or something like that. So you do have to do the job. And Schumacher, as you pointed out, he was the guy who did it at Nurburgring. It wasn't his teammates.
Now, what are we expecting for next year? We know that Red Bull potentially going to have to find somewhere for Ticktum to go next year. Arguably, it could be Super Formula, where they've sent drivers before. Marcus, what are we expecting for Schumacher? We know Prema is a force in F2. Is that relationship likely to continue up the ladder, perhaps?
I think there's a pretty strong chance, yeah. I mean, Mick has said that at the moment his focus is on single-seaters and trying to get to Formula 1. So,
he drove a DTM car at the weekend briefly, didn't he?
Yeah, and there's obviously a very strong family relationship with Mercedes. Yeah, he can't race in the DTM with Mercedes next year, but yeah, that suggests that the logical next step for him is Formula 2, wherever he finishes in the championship this year, I would say that that's the logical step, because even if he has a massive fade out in the last couple of events and drops to 6th in the championship or something, he's still a multiple times race winner in F3 and has had 2 years there. So your career momentum would logically take you there. As you say, Prema have an F2 team. Whether there'd be room there, I don't know, because obviously they've got relationships with drivers to balance, and it's a bit more difficult in Formula 2 to just say,
keep adding cars,
he's part of the family, like you would in Formula 3. Yeah. So you can only run 2 cars. So, but they would be pretty keen to have him, I would imagine.
I think it's important to see him in Formula 2 next year, just to see whether this development progression we've seen in the last few European Formula 3 rounds isn't a false dawn and it's genuine progress as a driver. I think Marcus touched on it before, that we've seen this before in Formula 4. And I remember even back when he was in karting and he finished second at the end of season finals behind Dinam Ahmed. Obviously, he is European Formula 3 contemporary now. And Ahmed was huge in international junior karting, won everything there was going. And this would have been at the end of the year after Michael's accident. And I just remember thinking at the time, just at that age, to be able to do that when you've got that personal turmoil going on shows immense character. And the fact that he has progressed the way he has in car racing with the weight of expectation because of that surname. I remember watching Formula 3 when Bruno Senna was racing and thinking, that can't be very easy. For Mick, 7-time world champion father who had the accident he had, and see we've not seen or heard from since the accident, just makes it even harder. So all credit to him for the progress that he's made and the fact that he continues to do it, and he doesn't seem to shy. I mean, he's not the most sort of outgoing of people, but he doesn't seem to shy away from the fact that is who he is and he needs to do the job. So just be brilliant to see him in F2 1 season or 2 seasons, whatever it is, just to see if he is the real deal and can go on to be in Formula 1, because what a brilliant story that would be.